Start recording the meeting of tonight. This is April 8th meeting, and this is our second oil and gas meeting, public meeting regarding updating our regulations on oil and gas. And tonight we're going to be focusing on locational issues such as setbacks, alternative location analysis, siting analysis, where oil and gas might or might not occur throughout the county. We have a lot of information to share tonight, and then we certainly want to hear from all of you, and then we'll open it up for a public testimony. I see that at least one of our commissioners is online right now, listening in, and we will probably invite her to make some comments in a few minutes. But before that, I'm going to turn it over to Leslie Ellis, who was going to lead the introductions of tonight's meeting.
Well, and I'll actually turn it over to Commissioner Shattuck McNally to see if she wants to say any welcoming comments to everybody for this meeting before I dive into information about schedules and all that good stuff.
Thank you, Leslie. Hello, everyone. I'm Commissioner Shattuck McNally, or Jody Shattuck McNally, and really glad to be here. I'm glad that we're having these opportunities to have public forum. I'm anxious to hear from the public today and hear their comments and from staff, and I'll be listening. And if I may, at the end, I'd like to share a couple more comments. And I just really want to thank the staff for all their hard work and for scheduling these opportunities. And I want to thank the public and for those who are on the call today for engaging in the process. I know it's a beautiful evening outside, and we might want to be outside walking our dogs or getting our gardens ready. And I just really appreciate the public engagement and spending your evening and your time, your family time with us as we work on these important documents and regulations. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll echo that appreciation for everybody who's here. It looks like we have about 36 attendees who are watching beyond some of the staff who you see on the screen here. And so I'm Leslie Ellis. I'm the Community Development Director at the county. I'm part of this project team. And my role is really quick here tonight, just to remind everybody what the schedule is and how the process is working. We've had some questions from members of the public about how does this all work as we develop these different drafts? So I wanted to explain that a little bit. And I think for those of you who've been following along since the early days of this project, you've probably heard this a few times, so sorry to bore you with the details, but we are developing these different drafts as an iterative process. And if you go to our webpage on the larimer.org planning webpage, and Matt, I might ask if you could pull that up so folks can see that. There is a schedule there that identifies some of the upcoming dates. So today's meeting is focused around land use, location, siting topics, and that's what you saw in the draft that was put on the webpage for review. Our next upcoming meeting is going to be April 29th, and that one will be aimed to focus around the public health, welfare, and environmental standards. And we will issue a draft for that several days before the meeting. We had some questions about could we issue drafts a bit sooner, and we are working frantically and furiously to get these ready for each meeting. So we can't commit to issuing drafts any sooner than 3 days. We will work as fast as we can to get them out as quickly as possible so everybody can review. The meeting after that is then on May 13th, and that one is aimed at focusing around compliance and fees and financial assurances and those sorts of topics. And then following that, we will have a draft of all of these pieces that we'll put together, and that will be at about the end of May 25th, and that will be available for public comment. So as you see each of these drafts, you'll see cumulative information that's presented and new information in each draft. For tonight's piece, we've had a lot of written comments from people even before this meeting. We'll hear verbal comments tonight, much as we did in the last meeting. We'll have an opportunity for people to provide verbal comments, and we'll take notes. Tonight, it will be an opportunity for each person to comment for up to 3 minutes. If you have more to say than that, please do send us written comments, or you can put comments or questions in the chat box. We will try to answer what questions we can. tonight, and then we'll come back at the next meeting and we can continue to answer questions that we get also. We also had some questions about how are the commissioners involved and when will they see drafts and what's their input. So the county commissioners, of course, are the people who decide ultimately what appears in the final draft. So we take their lead on how they'd like to move forward. They're the decision makers and the policy makers. Our role as staff and working with Matt Sura in his consulting role is to hear all the information from the public, to prepare technical drafts, and then to present all that information to the commissioners. We'll take it to the Planning Commission and the commissioners. We do anticipate scheduling probably another afternoon work session with the commissioners in early May, possibly sooner. We have the opportunity every Monday afternoon, if time permits, to schedule time with the commissioners to talk about various projects such as this. And so we will we'll definitely be back in front of them in May and have some conversation about these different sections and pieces that you're seeing information about tonight and then at the upcoming meetings. And then we have joint work sessions with the Planning Commission and the commissioners. So the commissioners are very engaged in this, and we'll take their lead if they feel like they want more time or less time or what have you. So hopefully that answers some of the questions we got about, how will the commissioners be involved with this? And then we do anticipate that at this point that the final draft is, we're aiming for a hearing in July 26th. Schedules are always subject to change. If we need more time on something, we may have to take more time, but we put a schedule out there so that we can try to stick to it as much as possible. We did have also a question about who's doing the drafting. And so Matt Sura, who you'll meet in a minute if you haven't already been part of these conversations, is a consultant attorney who we brought on board to work with the staff and the county to help bring his technical expertise and knowledge about the subject of oil and gas regulations. And he's been doing a lot of the heavy lifting in putting together the red lines that you see in the drafts. He consults with staff because we know which sections of the code need to be looked at and that sort of thing, and how our zoning works and how the kind of the nuances of the county and what's in the current draft. But he's bringing a lot of his knowledge and expertise and helping us prepare those drafts. So, and we'll continue to work collaboratively with him through the process. So hopefully that answers some of the questions that we've been getting. If anybody continues to have questions about process, we can definitely answer those. If you have, please put them in the chat box and we'll come back to them later. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Matt, who can tell you a little bit about the decision-making process, and then we'll hand it over to Matt Sura to do his presentation. And really quickly, why don't we go around, and the other staff who are on tonight, if you could just introduce yourselves really quickly so everybody knows who's here, that would be great. Thank you.
Let's start with Frank.
Hello, I'm Frank Haug with the County Attorney's Office.
Thank you, sir. Leah?
Hi, Leah Schneider with the Larimer County Health Department.
Matt Sura?
Yeah, this is Matt Sura, Special Counsel on Oil and Gas Matters.
Lori Catteridge?
Good evening, I'm Lori Catteridge, and I'm with the Community Planning and Infrastructure Resources Group, and Community Development is one of our departments.
I'm Matt Lafferty. I'm the Principal Planner for Long-Range Planning Activities in the Community Development Department. Thanks again for attending and for all the people that have already started to share their thoughts on the information that we've put out. We certainly encourage your comments and hope that we can incorporate them into our comments or our code as we move forward. Last month when we met at the last meeting, I spent a little bit of time talking about the public process that Larimer County uses to evaluate applications that are referred to as special review applications, for which our code currently says that all oil and gas applications that are submitted to Larimer County will go through a special review process. In the material that I sent out and has been posted on the webpage, we've copied that section of our code into that material so that you can look at it a little bit more detailed. But it's also outlined here on the screen. I believe it's sharing. Can people see it, or do I need to share my screen real quick?
Not yet, Matt.
How about there?
There you go.
So this is the code language that comes out of our new land use code at section 643. And it outlines the special review process as we talked last week or at the last meeting. And you can see here by this diagram on the first 2 pages that there are at least 8 steps in this process, starting from a very early stage in the process where there's a pre-application conference with the applicant to talk to them about what kind of submittal requirements and what procedures they're going to have to go through. And that's what a pre-application conference does. And if you'll recall, last time we met, I discussed that there's a sketch plan process. And this is a conceptual stage where an applicant would give us conceptual material and a location of where they're proposing to go. And we would notify the public at that point that an application's been submitted and the public is allowed an opportunity to comment. Following that sketch plan meeting, we have a neighborhood meeting in which there's an actual get together and the applicant and the public are allowed to discuss the merits of the case live and in person and try to resolve any differences that there may be there. And then there's this whole application of a formal application. This is where after the neighborhood meetings occurred and the sketch plan and we've identified major issues, the applicant comes back with a formal application. And when we say formal application, what we're referring to is a public hearing application. This is the application that will be reviewed and vetted and ultimately is presented to the Planning Commission and to the Board of County Commissioners for their consideration. And so steps 5 and 6 and 7 are all happen after that step 4 in about a 4 to 6 month period. And terminates with a review and decision by the Board of County Commissioners. And then if it is approved, there are some post-decision actions that go on, construction plans, things like that. I think the important thing that we would like to point out in this information here is that the process is outlined fairly thoroughly. There's a lot of opportunity for the public to be involved. And when it comes to the decision-making process, it's important to note that, and I got to find it while I'm reading here, that the Board of County Commissioners get to make a decision and they get to decide. I thought it was in C here. Oh, right here under item B, sorry. The county commissioners, it says here, may review, approve with conditions, or deny a special review application. And I know a lot of people have asked us, hey, why don't you put in the oil and gas regulations that the commissioners have the right to deny? Well, I'd ask that you consider that this is an extension of the oil and gas regulations, and it does specifically say that the board gets to review these applications, and based upon the approval criteria for oil and gas operations, they could deny these applications if they so choose to. So that is something that's out there and available to them. We welcome any comments that you may have on that later, but this process is outlined and is intended to provide as much public input as possible and transparency, and still get through the process in a reasonable time frame. Generally speaking, this process takes between 6 months and a year. And with that, I'm going to close my comments up, and I'm going to turn it over to Matt Sura, who has a presentation, and then we will open it up for public comment. Matt?
Thanks so much, Matt. I'm going to share my screen here and start the presentation. So thank you. And just a reminder of what's already been said. This is just a small part of the changes that are being proposed in this discussion draft. Only a discussion, a straw man or a straw dog, if you like, for folks to be able to react to and we can get comments on. So with that, I'm going to just jump right into the red lines. And I apologize for this, but you all have seen the red lines. And so I'm not expecting that you're going to be able to read the screen with me, but I just wanted to use it as a reference. Matt had already mentioned the special use review process that starts with a preliminary meeting or pre-hearing conference, that is, or pre-application conference. And then it gets into the sketch plan review, and thought that that was going to be a good opportunity to start looking at some of the requirements that go beyond what is currently required at the Colorado Gas, at either the Colorado Gas Conservation Commission, but also in the county regulations. And this preliminary site analysis is really kind of a granular look at where their location is being proposed and what might be affected, what values might be affected by that location. And so we're asking for other drilling and spacing applications in the area, existing oil and gas facilities within a quarter mile, all existing and platted residential areas, and looking at high occupancy buildings, schools, nursing facilities, childcare centers. It goes on and on. Reservoirs, public water supply wells, high priority wildlife habitat. And we're putting this in for discussion purposes because, frankly, I think that this probably would serve the county better if it was not in the code. It was referenced in the code as the preliminary site analysis is required, but then it shows up in a lot of detail as to what is required in that preliminary site analysis in what is called the oil and gas application and submittal requirement handout, which is being developed by the county currently. Again, if it's referenced, in the code, it then becomes a requirement. How to satisfy that requirement can exist outside the code, and frankly, can then be amended more easily and new requirements added to that as necessary. Similarly, the alternative location analysis is a requirement that we're considering in this phase, in this sketch plan review. And an alternative location analysis is currently required by the Colorado Gas Conservation Commission only in certain instances. In the case of the county, we're looking at requiring it in every instance. Anytime an oil and gas facility is proposed within the county, they will do an alternative location analysis. And this is to try to avoid, as we discussed last time, try to avoid those areas, those values that may be harmed by oil and gas development or any industrial development. And so we're looking at in requiring them to look at least 3 alternatives. And I want to make sure that folks understand and get a little bit of background on the alternative location analysis. It is not the staff directing where oil and gas development should occur. It is merely asking the operator to take a good hard look and propose something that's going to be least impactful. And in the event that they have not proposed something that's least impactful, hopefully the alternative location analysis will indicate that. It does not in any way give some sort of wink or a nod by the staff that this is the location that they're going to accept. No, it's still, the staff isn't making the decision, first of all. And secondly, it's only making sure that the best location possible is put forward. It doesn't indicate whatsoever that it will be approved. Now, I was involved in one of the first alternative location analysis before it was called that in a proposal in Larimer County in Great Western's PACE proposal in Windsor. And this was a proposal for a huge development. It's over, I think, 25 wells that was going to be put on a 35-acre plot that was about 500 feet from the Bison Ridge neighborhood here and another neighborhood here, Prairie Meadows. So I think it's something like that to the south. And so just an awful location, frankly, because it found a location that was closest to homes and drilling into a complete open space. And at the time, the Colorado Gas Conservation Commission had a regulation saying that any production facility needed to be located as far as possible from homes. And so working with the neighborhoods in this area, we said, look, as far as possible from homes requires you to determine what as far as possible. And the only way to determine that is an alternative location analysis. That's when the first one was done. Ultimately, we were able to turn that around, and they did find a location that was far away from homes and in a much more remote location and drilling towards underneath the development. Similarly, in Arapahoe County, I worked with another community where it is in remote Arapahoe County. And if you look to the south, if you look to the west, even if you look to the east from this community, you can't see another home because there aren't any. And yet the oil and gas operator decided to locate it just within 1,000 feet from the homes in this neighborhood. Again, we went to the Colorado Gas Conservation Commission and said, hey, look, you got it backwards. Just because they got a good deal, or the operator got a good deal on developing a surface location here, doesn't make it a good location. In fact, it's the worst location that you could have. If they wanted to develop this resource, they could find a location that would be at least 2,000 feet away from the closest home and drill west to east rather than east to west. So again, just to wrap that up, an alternative location analysis is not giving that any indication that that's going to be an acceptable location. It just gives the operator an opportunity to show their work that they did look at current surface uses and they found the best location possible given the resource that they're trying to develop. Going into location restrictions, again, this discussion draft has a number of areas that are going to be considered for oil and gas development, including the natural areas, forestry, agriculture, agricultural, commercial enterprise, open and heavy industrial and airport, planned development or rural plan development where oil and gas is a specified use. We're looking at, and again, that means that implicit in that means that the residentially zoned areas within the county would not be allowed for oil and gas development. And we're going to take a look at what that might look like. Matt's going to pull some slides up after I'm done here. But moving into to the setbacks, there's a 2,000-foot setback from a school or childcare center that's consistent with the Colorado Gas Conservation Commission. There's currently in current code is that oil and gas locations shall be at least 1,000 feet from building units, and that is twice the setback that is currently at the Colorado Gas Conservation Commission, where they've got what's considered a hard setback at 500 feet. We're also looking at having that 1,000-foot setback be applied to community parkland, public parks, regional parkland, trails and trailheads, which is well beyond anything that is proposed in the Colorado Gas Conservation Commission, and public water supply surface intakes or public water supply wells. And that is consistent with current commission regulations. Oil and gas locations can be located within 1,000 feet or between 1,000 and 2,000 feet from platted residential building units, unless these conditions are satisfied. And this is basically taken from the Colorado Gas Conservation Commission, except they are looking at locations from 500 feet to 2,000 feet and allowing it to to go less than 2,000 feet if they meet these conditions. The county's proposal here, again, for discussion purposes, is looking at 1,000 feet to 2,000 feet. So again, not allowing any oil and gas development less than 1,000 feet from homes. Also looking at increasing setbacks from rivers and streams of 500 feet. This is not found in the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission regulations. Also applying that to storage, water storage facilities, ditches that transport water. Also, current regulations prohibit oil and gas development within the 100-year floodplain unless no other location is feasible and appropriate permissions are obtained. Again, that is beyond the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, who does allow oil and gas development in the floodplain. We're also looking at the possibility of adding particularly for the natural resources district. And these are areas that have been set aside that for their natural beauty, for natural purposes, for wildlife uses, for hiking, for their scenic values, and requiring them to go through 1041 permitting process in addition to the special use review. So this would be on top of that. I'm going to go into details on all of this. So just to quickly recap, we've got the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission current regulations in black and the discussion draft in red. The 2,000-foot setback from school facilities is the same. 500-foot setback from homes. Larimer County currently has 1,000-foot setbacks, which is double the commission setback. And the commission has a 500 to 2,000-foot setback from homes. Larimer County's discussion draft has the same conditions, but is only 2,000 to 1,000. 1,000-foot setback from public water supply intakes or wells is the same as the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. The commission has 1,000-foot setback from designated outside activity areas. That sounds like it's protective, but frankly, you have to go through rulemaking to get a location designated by the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission as a designated outside activity area. I think that there are 2 now in the state. So given the fact that the local government, Larimer County, has the ability to regulate oil and gas and certainly has land use authority, we're proposing that we skip that requirement to go through the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission and just designate community parkland, public parks, regional parkland, trails and trailheads as protected with a 1,000-foot setback. There's also a 500-foot setback at the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, but only for sport fishing streams. Most of these are located on the western slope, frankly. Larimer County discussion draft has a 500-foot setback from all rivers and streams. And finally, Oil and Gas Conservation Commission does not have any setback requirement from floodplains. And as I mentioned earlier, we're looking at a requirement that they are located any oil and gas facilities are located outside of floodplains unless no other location is feasible. And that's in current regulations. So at this point, I'm going to pause and see if Matt can share some of the slides that he's come up with. I'm going to stop sharing now and hand it over to Matt Lafferty.
You're muted.
Can't get to it with the screen share on. Okay. Mr. Sir wanted me to share with you guys out there that a couple of things. In his presentation, he outlined that there would be certain zone districts that potentially would be restricted from having oil and gas operations in them. And then there would be some that would allow oil and gas as one alternative thought process for regulating where they can and can't go. So the map that you see on the screen before you is all of Larimer County. And I've turned off all the zoning colors and I've recolored everything, so that you could see what his thought process was. So in this picture, you can see that there's really three different colors. The white.
I'm not sure that I'm seeing this, Matt.
I think you might have to try to share again.
Oh man. Okay, it's coming. Sorry. Tell me
there
if it
you
comes.
go. That looks good.
Is that it? Okay, sorry about that. So the screen that's on you shows these white areas. And those are areas that are already in incorporated parts of the county. So down here, you can see Loveland has already annexed certain areas into the city. We contain no jurisdiction over the white areas of the county. So a lot of this white area in here is Fort Collins, Loveland, Windsor area, a little bit of Timnath, Johnstown, and then Berthoud, and then of course Estes Park up here in Wellington here. And so in those areas that are white, we contain no jurisdictional authority in there. So if an oil and gas operation is going to locate inside one of those white areas, they're going to have to deal with regulations that are adopted by those local municipalities and follow those rules. So those rules could be substantially different than what we have. The yellow area constitutes a larger area of the county. It's predominantly open zoning. Some of our new zone districts, such as natural resources, agriculture, forestry, those types of things occur in this yellow area. And even though housing is allowed in those areas, rural residential housing, it's done so at a relatively large scale. 10-acre lots or greater is usually the density allocation that we have in those areas. And you can see in a majority of the county, like up in this northern region, there's a lot of 35-acre parcels or even 160-acre parcels. So there's a lot of opportunity to spread out and have things dispersed in those locations. The color that's orange on the map is what we call RR1 and RR2. These zone districts are more rural residential zone districts. The lot sizes are not conducive of what you might find in a urbanized area, but they can get as small as a half acre or even smaller than that, or they get upwards of more around 2 acres and maybe a little larger than that. And so we've identified by Matt's comments in the red lines in those discussion draft that the yellow area would kind of be that area that we think zoning districts it should be permitted in. The orange area, it is something that's open for question whether or not it should be in those areas, because as you can see, they're around our urban core areas, and that's probably where you're going to see expansion of residential uses over the long term as these municipalities grow and add new housing units to their areas. And so the orange area, we certainly want to find out how people feel about that area versus the yellow area. And then again, keep in mind, we do not control anything in the white area. I'm going to stop share and I'm going to reopen a different set of maps that Mr. Sura asked that I would present real quick. So these maps, I think if the last time we had met, we showed you what setbacks might look like if you applied certain setbacks in the county. So if you administered a 1,000-foot setback, what you're going to see in the county, and I'm going to zoom out a little ways so we can get a perspective on this. Sorry, this is a lot of information on a program, so it takes a minute to build. We're kind of looking at the Loveland area, maybe the area of Loveland that goes a little bit south here. All the yellow you see are building units, houses, basically. The gray areas are inside our municipalities and the white areas in the county. So what we did was we turned on a layer, and it takes all those yellow dots and it puts a buffer around it. And so the first buffer is 1,000 foot. So if we administered 1,000 foot buffer around each one of those units, you can see that in this portion of the county, and we can look at other parts of the county here pretty quickly, it quickly eats up a lot of the area. It does leave some opportunity around the county for which there might be places where oil and gas operations can go. There's some areas that are relatively large, but this again is a natural resource area. So it may be that it's limited there. And then these areas would be in the municipality because they're colored gray. So that's what we see happens when you apply 1,000 foot setback. And I'm going to zoom in on that a little bit so you can get a little bit more perspective on this. And I'm going to turn that off for a second, and then I'm going to turn on the next level of information, which would be 2,000 foot setbacks, because we want to look at that and understand that. So again, I've zoomed in just to give you a perspective of where we're at. This is the downtown lake in Loveland. This is the south end of Boyd Lake. You have gravel pits along here. The Big Thompson River flows through here. Highway 402 is along this alignment right here. This is I-25 coming down through here. So southeast Loveland, southeast county, Johnstown is over here. And the light gray is areas that are annexed by Johnstown. So that same area, you turn on a 2,000 foot setback, let that generate for a second. You can see quickly that there's only really a couple of minute spots in which you can apply oil and gas operations in those areas. And this is relevant for the discussion from the standpoint that we need to understand, is there an opportunity for oil and gas to occur in the county or not? And how do we impact it by assigning certain things like setbacks or buffers from those things? Just to give you another shot of what that looks like, I'm going to page up and we're going to look at the northern tier of Larimer County. Look a little closer at that area north of Fort Collins that may be up towards the Wyoming line if this map would finish building. There you go. So on this map, you can see right here, this is Wellington, this gray area. This is Fort Collins here, Timnath's over here. This is Cobb Lake, so you have the hill at Cobb Lake here, and then we have a series of reservoirs that are located out here, or lakes. So same exercise, turn on the 1,000 foot. You can see that there is opportunity for drilling still out there. It's not as wide open as you would think because there's still a relatively large opportunity for housing that exists in here. You move a little bit further north and it'll start to get a little bit more dispersed. And you'll see that there's even more opportunity up there. But then as you move north, you start to run into the areas of the county that have been purchased for natural resources acquisition. So keep in mind, that was the concept of, maybe looking at 1041 regulations to look at that. Again, if you turn that map over and you assign a 2,000 foot setback to that area, you can see that the impact is a little greater. It eats up a lot more space, but they're still in some of the more northerly regions. You can see that there's still some ample opportunity for oil and gas operations to occur in those areas. So I'm going to stop sharing here. I'm going to turn it back over to Matt and let him finish his comments before we go to public testimony. Matt? You're muted.
Go. Thank you. Thanks, Matt. So yeah, I just wanted to go through the rest of presentation and we'll open it up to questions and comments. One of the areas that was made accessible, areas of regulation that was made accessible by Senate Bill 181 was a provision that eliminated a restriction for local governments to use 1041 powers and apply them to oil and gas. The elimination of that restriction is something that has been used in several jurisdictions. Weld County uses 1041 powers now to regulate oil and gas development, as does the town of Superior. And what it does is it is just a different look. They are considered areas or activities of state interest, and really put a placeholder there for local governments to say, look, this is something that is so important that local governments' concerns on this issue actually take precedence over the state's interest. Instead of being kind of co-equal, it kind of puts the local interest a little higher than the state. And one of the areas that is currently, and I know that the 1041 regulations are currently being evaluated and may be rewritten in the county, but one way that the county is currently using its 1041 authority is in the regulation of natural resource districts. These natural resource areas that, again, were put aside because of their natural values, natural beauty, wildlife habitat, and those types of issues. And so I just wanted to go through and talk to you what that criteria would be and how it might be applied to an oil and gas development proposal within a natural resource district. One is that, some of what is always the case in whether it's in special use review or in this 1041 is the proposal will not negatively impact public health and safety. That's pretty consistent, but there's some other things that go beyond, like in D, the proposal is not going to have a significant adverse effect or will adequately mitigate significant adverse effects on the land or its natural resources on which the proposal is situated and on lands adjacent to the proposal. Again, it's that natural resource value that is being cited and is being evaluated. The other is J, that the benefits of the proposed development outweigh the losses of any natural resources or reduction of productivity of agricultural lands as a result of the proposed development. And K, the proposal demonstrates that the costs to mitigate are proportional to the benefits achieved from the mitigation. Again, these are different criteria that are used specifically in cases of 1041 permits that I think would be helpful to the county in protecting the natural resource districts and the values, the natural resource values in those districts. Now we're going to move on to reciprocal setbacks or reverse setbacks. And this is not currently dealt with in the county. Again, this is just for discussion review purposes. But what we're looking at in the red line that I've provided is maintaining the 1,000-foot setback minimum for pre-production activities. And the reason that this is important is that you have proposals out there, and there has been a number of cases where an oil and gas facility is approved and there's nothing out there. It's surrounded by open space, say, or agricultural land. And the oil and gas operator either sits on the permit for a year or develops the permit, but only develops a handful of wells when they have maybe 20 that have been approved on the location. And in the interim, suddenly there's residential development that moves in around it. And suddenly you've got people that are newly in their homes and are suddenly faced with hydraulic fracturing and drilling activities, loud industrial activities that are less than 1,000 feet from their homes, the prescribed setback. And so to ensure that that never happens, were put in this proposal saying there can't be any, if there's an oil and gas facility that has been approved and it hasn't been fully developed, there can be no new housing development around that for 1,000 feet until that oil and gas facility is completely finished. Once it moves into its production phase, the impacts of oil and gas development go way down. This is found both in air quality monitoring. It's also found in, frankly, common sense and also the impacts that you'll hear from people who live near oil and gas development. Those impacts, the industrial nature of those impacts are far greater during the drilling and hydraulic fracturing or completion phases than it is during the production phase. During drilling and completion, we know that there's 24-hour a day, 7 days a week drilling. There's noise, there's increased traffic, there's dust, there's airborne toxins, a lot of issues. You have a noise wall that is surrounding the location. It is truly an industrial area. Once that is finished, particularly if you're using pipelines to pipe that product, there's very little truck traffic. And frankly, there's far, far less impacts or potential for impacts. And so that's why allowing for homes to be built closer than the 1,000-foot setback makes a lot of sense, because they're not moving into an industrial area. They're moving into an area that has an industrial use near it, but it's not even half as impactful of a use. So we're looking at a 200-foot setback from an oil and gas facility without wells. That could be like a tank battery or other facility, maybe a compressor engine. 1 to 2 wells is 200 feet. 3 to 24 wells is 350 feet, and 25 or more wells, 500-foot setback. The other issue here is one of fairness. Somebody that is living in their home and has an oil and gas facility move into them, they are living in a residence. They expect it to stay residential, and for an industrial activity to move adjacent to their neighborhood or in the area is an insult to that residential use. The flip side, though, when there is an oil and gas facility that's in production phase and you decide to build a home or buy a home that is within 500 feet or 1,000 feet of that oil and gas facility, you're doing so with knowledge that there is that industrial use, and you weigh that in your decision. You have the opportunity to weigh that in your decision. The measurements are going to be taken from, can't quite see that, are taken from basically the outside of the working pad surface. Setbacks from flow lines or gathering lines should be a minimum of 50 feet. In the post-production phase, we want to make sure that there's at least a 50-foot setback from plugged and abandoned wells. And we've got some plating requirements that will more or less enforce all of that. I want to just talk through some pictures and representational pictures as to how this might be applied. This is a working pad, is actually a drilling pad surface. So this has just recently been drilled and completed. You can see that it's a much larger pad. It still has a sound wall up here where they were actually doing the drilling. The drilling rig is down, but this is as big of a pad as you're going to see. It's 13.5 acres in this case. What it is going to be brought down to is a 6.5 acre pad. And this is the working pad surface that is proposed as a definition in what I've proposed, but it's also a current definition of the Colorado Gas Conservation Commission. This working pad surface is the production facility, and the entire thing should have the setback from it, because yes, the actual facilities, the oil and gas facilities are here. We've got wellheads here. We've got separators here and tanks here, but the whole facility is going to be used by the oil and gas industry, and occasional trucks are going to be coming through here, and the whole thing is you know, frankly, an industrial facility. If you were to do a 350-foot setback from that working pad surface, you're looking at putting quite a bit of space off limits for any residential development, at least. In this case, you're looking at about 50 acres that ultimately will be taken out of use for residential use. Other uses could still be used. Certainly you can have a road here, but it's not going to be a residential area. The reason that it's important, I think, to look at the size of the facility is that a lot of there has been some folks who have written in and have said that they just want a flat setback, a reverse setback, you know, to be as large as possible, and looking at not valuing whether or not it's got 1 to 2 wells or 25 wells, I think is a mistake for this reason. This is got 12 wells. This is located outside of Berthoud, and it's a large industrial facility. There's no getting around it. This is a huge location. It's got emission control units here. It's got about 24 tanks. Again, you know, 12 wellheads. And this is also an oil and gas facility with 1 wellhead. And again, you look at the scale and the potential impact of this location, which is frankly, to my mind, a little bit more like a refinery than an oil and gas facility, or this one, it's hard to imagine that they need the same setback, because they don't have the same nuisance values. They don't have the same threat to public health, safety, and welfare in the environment. I want to talk a little bit about fairness too. Throughout Colorado, since the 1950s, you know, this has been considered an oil and gas play. And it was in 1997, the Colorado state legislature put forward the Greater Wattenberg area drilling windows. And this was because we were starting to see a lot of residential development happening at the same time as oil and gas development, which sounds familiar because that's exactly what we're experiencing now. And what the legislature did, in one of the worst decisions possible, was to give the oil and gas industry a guarantee of 20 locations for every square mile, or a 5-spot, like a 5-spotted dice for every quarter section. So as you can see here, you've got one in the northwest, southwest. You've got one in the northeast, the southeast, and one in the middle. And these are how big those drilling windows are. Again, this was guaranteed to the oil and gas industry, and the surface owners didn't have an ability to say no. At the time, all the oil and gas industry had to do was ask them for a surface use agreement. If they didn't provide a surface use agreement, they would quote bond on and post a $2,000 bond and be able to drill on their surface without their permission. And this happened throughout the Front Range. And so we have got the legacy of these windows and wells throughout the Front Range. And this is how it looks. So eventually those areas become where we live. This is in Frederick. And this is a 5-spot. And you can see that a subdivision was built up around these individual oil and gas locations. What is being proposed by some who have written in is, you know, a very large reverse setback from both existing wells, single wells, the same as multi-pad wells, as same as plugged in abandoned wells. And again, what that would mean is that this entire area outside of Loveland, which is an urban growth area, would be prohibited from any residential development. It's putting about 5,000 acres off limits to residential development. And it's certainly, you know, something that could be decided, but I don't believe that the literature, the scientific studies, the health studies, any of that would indicate the need to take that dramatic move. Just to look at what effect it would have on Fort Collins. This is Fort Collins, the northernmost edge of Fort Collins. We've got a neighborhood that built up around oil and gas development. Again, this is a plugged and abandoned well. This is a shut-in well. This is an existing injection well. This is a producing well. And we've got a rural neighborhood and a very dense neighborhood within the city limits of Fort Collins. So I think I'm gonna stop my screen sharing there and open it up for comments and questions.
Thanks, Matt. That was a bunch of good information. I know that I've been watching the chat and the question and answer area. There's a lot of people that are posing questions, and yeah, the idea was that tonight we'll do a presentation and then you're given 3 minutes to discuss things, and we'll take these questions. If we got time, we might answer a few of them later tonight. If not, we'll try to copy them and provide responses to them and post them tomorrow or the next day on the webpage so that you can see that there's responses to them. So with that, I think we're going to turn it over and we're going to open it up for discussion. The idea for making discussion tonight is if you hit the button at the bottom of your screen that says red hand, it will let me know who's waiting to talk. And then as I call you, I will release your microphone so that you can talk. Leslie, were you going to do a note taking again?
Yeah, I'll do note taking. And it looks like Commissioner Shattuck McNally has her hand up too.
Okay, well, we'll start with Commissioner Shattuck McNally. Feel free to make a comment, ma'am.
Thanks, Matt, Leslie, and Matt. Matt Lafferty. Thanks, Matt Lafferty. Thanks, Matt Sura, and everyone else for being here. So I have a couple questions. Actually, I have several, but I won't hog all the time. I really appreciate the presentation. So I was wondering if, and I wanted to ask this for Mr. Sura, if wells in production ever become more impactful again, either by reentry or recompletion, do wells become more, I'm sorry, let me reword this. Wells in production, can they ever become impactful again, either by reentry or recompletion or any further development? Is that considered?
The answer is yes. Re-impactful, certainly, because like any industrial development, there are going to be times when there needs to be maintenance, and that can cause some impacts. There can also be, and we haven't seen this yet with the horizontally drilled, hydraulically fractured wells, recompletion or re-stimulation of those wells, but it's not nearly as impactful as what you've seen when the wells were initially drilled and completed. On a multi-well pad, you're talking about months of industrial development. If you're talking about a recompletion, you're talking about days.
Okay, so I have two more things, and now I'll let the rest of the public ask questions. They might be asking some of the same things I would ask. So I had a little question, and it's always the language and the wording that matters. I saw the statement, unless no other location is feasible. And I'm wondering, when you put that in the regulations, how do we decide what is feasible? And then who gets that decision? And do we need to be more do we need to put in some wording in there? When we have that, if there's nothing, no other site is feasible, who gets to determine that? And how do we, what do we need to put criterion to say what is reasonable to say what is not feasible? Am I clear on that?
You most certainly are, Commissioner, and it's a great question. whether something is feasible or not, has a lot of case law around it. It is a defined term, in terms of the cases that have been brought. That is a term that is currently used whether or not an oil and gas facility is located within a floodplain and its concurrent code. And so defining, feasibility or putting some parameters as to what they would need to show specifically to be, considered infeasible. Other locations are infeasible, is something that we could do. And just to, clarify that, we might say that, that cost is no issue. That, if they're physically incapable of drilling from another location without cost being a consideration, then, that would still be feasible. That's one way we could make a change and cabin that language a little bit.
Great. And one more last thing. So I was invited by several residents who, I think one of their houses has been there for 150 years, and they live right next to a reservoir, and they live in unincorporated Larimer County, northeast of Fort Collins. And they have, the neighborhood is kind of built up around them. And one, there's an oil and gas current site there operating. And when I went to visit with them, I was there for a half hour, and I tried to not think about where I was, but I was standing within a few feet from those. And I really noticed the headache, but I was talking to those folks, and I was thinking about when we talk about reverse setbacks, and these folks can't afford to move away. If we have reverse setbacks and if we allow building within a certain distance, there's some folks who, the environmental justice piece, that might be the only place they can afford to live, or they can't afford to move away. And so when we're talking about some of these regulations, do we have anywhere in our regulations talking about environmental justice, some of these disproportionately impacted neighborhoods that maybe that's people, they can't move away? And I was wondering if that was anywhere in our regulations. I don't think there. I know the state's looking at that or will be looking at that. And I was just curious about that.
It's a really great question. I appreciate it. So 2 parts. One is that if there are emissions coming from any oil and gas facility, it is in violation of the law. I know that I personally, for the last 10 years, have been working to strengthen the rules to basically eliminate those kinds of emissions from any oil and gas facility, regardless of its size. And so that is one way to combat that. The other question about disproportionately impacted communities is a good one. And there currently is not anything in the current draft. That's not the section that we're working on here, but looking at incorporating some of the protections that are in the Colorado Gas Conservation Commission regulations, frankly, across the board. Right now, the Colorado Gas Conservation Commission requires increased notice for disproportionately impacted communities and a requirement that there is some additional outreach to those communities. And I frankly think that that's just good practice for any oil and gas development for every community. And so that is the direction that you're going to be seeing I put forward in subsequent drafts. The final question is that we're living with a legacy of oil and gas development. And if we were to prohibit new residential development everywhere that there is any oil and gas development throughout the Front Range, not just in Larimer County, but throughout the Front Range, we really would eliminate residential development from Larimer County east all the way through the I-25 corridor. And there's just no place for it because there's so many oil and gas facilities, whether they're one well or they're multi-well facilities or they're plugged in abandoned wells, we're just covered with oil and gas facilities. So that I think the best way to address the impacts of oil and gas development is to ensure that there is no leaking facility and that there's increased inspections and full-time monitoring.
That's really helpful. I'll keep the rest of my questions. So I know I'll have time to ask later, but I appreciate that and appreciate going first. Thank you so much.
Okay. Ben Trujillo, you have now got the floor for 3 minutes.
Matt, I'll go ahead and share my screen. I was typing notes while that conversation was going on. But I'll go ahead and put it up now while we're taking notes from the other folks. Are you able to see those notes now?
Yes, ma'am, we are.
Okay, great.
Okay, is my mic unmuted now?
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay, thank you. Yes, one of the problems I have with the proposed regulations is that we act as if the only thing that has impact on our people are the effects of development of oil and gas. But we act as if there's no impact on our people if there is less competition in the environment, I mean in the gas industry, and the costs that come about to individuals as a result. So right now I'm almost at the point where I'm retired, but I can remember a time when every time the gas price went up 10 cents a gallon, it seriously affected me. And many people I know, when I had 2 kids in college and I was making a house payment and I was making a car payment and I'm trying to run a business, at 10 cents a gallon would just about, well, it hurt. And there are effects to over-regulation. The other problem I have is that I thought we had voted about 2 years ago, the citizens, about some of these issues, and it seemed like that's just forgotten. So should we just cease voting and not care anymore because somebody else is making regulations that override our vote? And the last thing I would say is just the phrase, the golden goose. There is a point at which you have taken the goose and you've squeezed it all you can, and then the goose goes away. And then the costs of bringing back any kind of development are just beyond consideration. And I think I'll just stop right there. I haven't been watching my time, but I presume I'm almost done.
Thank you. Andrew Forks Gummison. I'll get it right someday. You are now allowed to talk.
Thank you. Sorry, I clicked allow to unmute and then forgot to click unmute. Thank you. My name is Andrew Forkus Goodmanson. I'm the Deputy Director of Logic. You're getting closer, Matt. We'll probably do enough of these where you'll get the last name right. I have a lot to say. I'm one of those who have submitted written comments. I submitted some in advance of the release of the draft on April 5th, and I just 2.5 hours ago submitted a brief response to the draft. So I'll keep my oral comments brief. I did want to say a couple of things focused on the presentation today. First, that was in response to Mr. Lafferty, your statement that we don't need to reiterate the denial authority, specifically in the oil and gas section. I could not disagree more. The SB 181 and the regulation or the state law allows the County of Larimer County to deny oil and gas applications that are not protective of public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife resources. That cannot be stated clearly enough in the oil and gas regulations. It's relevant and specific and important. I'd also like to push back on Mr. Sura's statement that there's no need to cite in the alternative location analysis any statement about guaranteed approval or anything like that. I agree that Mr. Sura is right that an alternative location analysis is not a guarantee of approval. However, when worded loosely or generally, such language can create the appearance of a guarantee of approval and can lend the county and the residents of the county the perception that the county is working to approve permits rather than to protect public health and safety. And that is an important perception. Finally, I'd like to mention something that Mr. Lafferty said about setbacks precluding development. And I would say that is fine. The goal of the county regulation should be to protect health and safety first. That is what the state's mission is. And if that means that some places are off limits for oil and gas development, then that is allowed and anticipated by the law, specifically called out in SB 181 to allow local governments to deny development to deny development permits for oil and gas to keep minerals in the ground if the purpose is to protect health and safety. So I apologize for sounding a little frustrated tonight. It's really frustrating to hear the same debate over and over again about whether or not we can deny permits. We clearly can, and we clearly can keep minerals in the ground if it's to protect health and safety. So I'll leave it at that and refer you please to my written comments, which are much calmer and more eloquent than I was this evening.
Matt, I'm going to jump in really quickly. If everybody could please, when they state their name, also state where they live in the county and if they have an affiliation. And Mr. Trujillo, if you wouldn't mind just popping that in the chat, and then I'll make sure we get that for the notes. Thank you, everybody.
Hi, this is Brad Tidd. Yes, I live in Fort Collins. I am semi-retired out of IBM, and I do real estate development and house flipping. I buy hundreds of acres at a time sometimes. So the random change in rules which affect the price of a property could ruin people like me. I spent hundreds of thousands of dollars over the last few years redeveloping houses. That goes back into the community through, you know, the trades when I'm flipping a house or building a neighborhood. You know, if I'm ruined, it affects a whole bunch of people. I'm not doing this just because of economics. I think it's also an issue of fairness. I like the reverse setbacks as well as setbacks. It's important to have it both ways. First come, first serve, so to speak. I really want to make sure that that, you know, the change in property values, if there's a 2,000 foot setback, you know, we saw that you wipe out a huge area for any further oil and gas development. We need oil and gas. It's what runs the economy. You have to have a form of energy. Renewables are not yet there. I got solar on my own house. It's important, but you know, technologically, you can only have, you know, renewables up to 40% of your energy, mathematically and scientifically. I like the health, but you know, you can't. Okay. The other thing I would like to see, last time I said that, you know, return on investment, I'd really like to see the estimate of what these rule changes will cost the county in income, because, you know, lack of severance fees and all the other incomes you get from the oil and gas will significantly affect emergency services and other things like that. These things do not happen in a vacuum.
Thank you, Mr. Tidd. Your time is up though, but thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to announce the next speaker and the next couple so that we can keep people alert as when they're coming up. So next we have Ray Rowden, followed by Karen Artell, and then followed by David Austin. Ray, you're now unmuted, or you're allowed to speak.
All right, thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
So yeah, my name is Ray Rowden, R-O-W-D-E-N. You have it already, very good. I'm a 35-year resident of Colorado, 11 years northern Colorado, 10 of those in Fort Collins, and I just moved down to Johnstown late last year. I personally know a number of families that are in this industry. And the ones that I don't know, there are thousands of them. Beyond that, there are thousands of families that depend on the necessary work and thousands that depend on the service industries that grow up around this work. Critical work as it is. We're not, let me just throw this out. How are we, while looking at all the new people that are, while pre-planning for all the brand new people that are going to come here, don't we need resources for all those people? Don't we need to find a balance? That's what I think. Basically in Colorado, we're already a canary in the coal mine with regard to ultra restricted policies. I don't think, in fact, I plead that we don't experiment further with the livelihoods of these thousands and thousands of Colorado residents, all betting on other people coming here that we won't have resources for when they get here if we make these kinds of restrictions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, next up will be Karen Artell, followed by David Austin, and then Gala Martinez. Karen, you're free to speak now.
Okay, thank you. I had sent in written comments. Karen Artell, I live in Fort Collins. I did send in some written comments both before the draft came out and after. I must admit I did misunderstand some of the language in the draft, especially that related to zoning. So I just will ask a few questions. First of all, I'm just wondering about the reverse setbacks and again, what Commissioner Shattuck McNally mentioned, the need to consider well workovers, liquid uploading, and recompletions in relation to the reverse setbacks. I think I'm still not comfortable with that issue. I'm also wondering, the older wells that are just scattered throughout the county, as Mr. Sura explained, and if they're like 1 and 2 wells locations, the older ones, how much are they really producing at this point? And can they be plugged and abandoned? Can that kind of be a deal between the developer and the person who is operating those smaller sites to plug and abandon the well to reduce the need for, say a 2,000-foot setback? I really do think that is an option to be considered, especially again for the older, perhaps vertical wells and the sites that just have a few wells on them and really aren't producing very much. So I would like that to be considered. And then I do, as far as setbacks from actually the floodplain, I would prefer that there not be any variances to an oil and gas facility within the floodplain. I don't think that a 50-foot setback from plugged and abandoned wells is enough to allow, say, what if that plugged and abandoned well is leaking, is discovered to be leaking, or emissions are discovered? You may need to get heavy equipment into that site, and a 50-foot setback would not allow for that type of operation. I also think information regarding, and I think you may have already said this, but if information regarding permitted but not yet constructed oil and gas facilities, temporarily abandoned wells, shut-in wells, orphan wells, plugged-in abandoned wells, in all cases should have, I think, 1,000-foot setback. But and then the last thing is the term greenfield needs to be removed from the oil and gas facility regulations. So thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Next up is David Austin, followed by Gala Martinez, and then Deb Bajork. David, you're now allowed to unmute.
Okay. All right. My name's David Austin. I moved to Colorado in 1986 and have been a resident of Fort Collins since 1990. I just want to express a couple of concerns that I have. Oil and gas has been a very vital and basic source of economic income for Colorado forever. And I think that has to be taken into consideration. You know, you look at the jobs and the economy, the more the oil and gas industry is cut back, the more jobs, the more effect there's going to be on our economy. I just want to share a real quick story. Our grandson is a stepson of a fellow that's been working in the oil and gas industry now for about 20 years. He has a wife. He has 3 stepdaughters, a daughter, a son, and then our grandson. And this guy, I mean, he works hard, very hard, and to support that family. And I can tell you, if at some point in time, because of cutbacks in this industry, he lost his job, I can't imagine what would happen. I can't imagine what would happen. And you know, you think about that. He's just one person. He's just one family. There are thousands and thousands of people in this state and this county that depend on this. And I would hope that in your decisions that you would take that wholeheartedly into consideration and weigh and try to balance the effect of that versus the cutbacks that you feel that are needed. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Okay. Next up, Gala Martinez, followed by Deb York, and then Nadine Young. Gala, you are now unmuted or able to unmute.
Thank you. Yes, this is Gala Martinez, and I've lived in Fort Collins for over 150 years. Actually, I'm not quite that old, but my family has been in the area for that long. I also have a grandson. He's only 8 months old, actually not quite. And I hope someday for him to have a good job that will allow him to support his family. But there's something even more basic that I desire for my grandson. I want him to have clean air to breathe. I don't want him to grow up with asthma. I don't want him to be making visits to the emergency room, as many children in our area do. And it's well known that we have some of the worst quality air in state. And a lot of that is from the contribution of emissions from the oil and gas industry. Hopefully someday we'll get to the point where it's better regulated. We're not there yet. But moving beyond the personal and the anecdotal, I would first like to say that I really appreciated a statement Mr. Sura made in regards to the fact that planning to put in basically automatic designations, descriptions of parks, trails, etc. Thank you, great idea. I also noted that Mr. Sura repeatedly referred to these production facilities as industrial facilities, facilities for industrial use, at least half a dozen times. So I think we're in agreement that this is an industrial kind of a facility. So my question is, if these are industrial facilities, why are they not limited to areas that are zoned for heavy industry? What's the point of having zoning if it's not respected, basically? And I was thinking too, if we just put oil and gas where we have it zoned for heavy industry, then we wouldn't have to worry about reverse setbacks or setbacks for that matter. I'd also like to ask the question as to how are we determining which numbers we will use for setbacks or reverse setbacks? It is a confusing plethora of options when we look at different regulations, one thing for houses, another thing for daycares, another thing for this and for that.
30 seconds.
Oh, good, thank you. Where's the science for any of these numbers? The science I've seen shows that living within 2,500 feet of such an industrial facility is damaging to your health, and more so if it's cumulative, if there are other wells about, which is another thing that I should be included in the preliminary analyses. That's it, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, Deb Bjork, you are up next. Nadine Young after her, and then followed by Ed Behan. Deb, you're now allowed.
Okay, great. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm Deb Bjork. I'm a 30-year resident of Colorado, and I live in southwest of Fort Collins in unincorporated Larimer County. I thank you for all of these opportunities to have input on the regulations. The staff has provided a much greater feeling of having input back and forth than last year. I also became involved in the oil and gas regulations at the local level because I have asthma. I have 5 grandchildren that live in Fort Collins. Our air quality is horrible. In 2018, 2019, there were over 200 days that I got alerts on my phone that I should not go outside, and neither should several of my grandchildren. That's not a way to live. We have to consider cumulative impacts. It isn't enough to say all these oil and gas, we've always depended on oil and gas. It's killing us. I mean, climate change is apparent. And I feel for the people who work in the oil and gas industry. I'm sure it is very scary, but the change has to come. And I do believe that the state of Colorado can provide equitable job training, because the change is going to come one way or the other. Even the oil and gas industry says that there is, it's a finite resource. The change is going to come. We need to have the change come before we have ruined the planet. In regards to comments, I've submitted comments, 2 different, was a co-author on one and another section of comments. And so I just want to reiterate a couple of points. One, the setbacks section, I appreciated that it was very similar to the state setback section. However, I think that Larimer County can go stronger. We need to have a 2,000-foot setback from homes and occupied buildings with very, very few variances. oil and gas doesn't belong next to homes. If children are protected in school, they should be protected at home as well. The state has estimated, or excuse me, there's been an estimate that 2% of the $8 billion needed to plug 60,000 already drilled oil and wells.
30 seconds.
Oh gosh, already has already been, has only 2% of the $8 billion that is needed to plug the 60,000 oil and gas wells has been collected by the state. I guess I'll skip ahead to one last thing, and that is just that I would ask that in all of the areas that we look, especially reverse setbacks, we need to be bold and we need to be protective. The residents of Larimer County are depending on us to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Nadine Young is up now, and then followed by Ed Behan, then Richard Shepard, and then David Sullivan. Nadine, you are now allowed to unmute.
I just want to say thank you for allowing us this opportunity to speak on behalf of the citizens of the County of Larimer, and especially those of us who support the oil and gas industry. My name is Nadine Young. I have been a Colorado resident for over 30 years, and I've been in Fort Collins for more than 15. I moved from North Dakota when the oil and gas industry went bust in the 1980s. My husband lost his job, he lost his house, and we lost the ability to purchase property here in Colorado because of that foreclosure. Colorado already has the toughest regulations in the country regarding oil and gas, and I think we need to give those regulations a chance to work before we end up like North Dakota in the 1980s and the bust, where people lost jobs, they lost their homes, and they had to move away from their families just to be able to make a living. And I live with that legacy today because I didn't get to see my son didn't get to grow up with his grandparents. And we talk about how the environment is impacted. Well, it's impacted with everything we do. If people don't understand what it takes from the beginning of making a car that's electric until the end of its life, it pollutes just as much as any other car that's out there. And I will leave you with this final thought that no one has been able to answer for me. And it's very simple. This is my question to all of you out there. Name one product that does not have oil and gas in its supply chain. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next up is Ed Behan, followed by Richard Shepard, followed by David Sullivan, and then Randy Evans. Ed, you are now allowed to unmute and talk.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Ed Behan. I'm a resident in Fort Collins. I've been living here about 5 years, but I had lived in Boulder previously. I'd also lived in Texas and Louisiana for about 15 years. I feel that the discussion about the economic impacts kind of gets away from the notion that the primary function of these regulations is indeed to protect health and safety. Ultimately, the companies will have to make a decision as to whether they can operate. I have a feeling that even with the setbacks that are being proposed, as much as they resist that, they will figure out a way to operate. And if it reduces their profit margin somewhat, I'm afraid that's not our problem. The reality is this industry is a boom and bust industry, even without figuring in the environmental regulations. And sooner or later, we're going to have to figure out a way for a smooth transition to alternative forms of energy. And the oil and gas companies make some lip service to the idea that they're involved in that sort of thing. But again, always seem to be digging in their heels and resisting the transition, as far as I can tell. The regulations that are being proposed, I think they're an improvement on what was passed last year. I do say Larimer County has the option to be stronger than what is proposed even under the new state rules. I think our concern has to be protection of health and safety in the environment. for our local communities. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, Richard Shepard, followed by David Sullivan, Randy Evans, and then Gary Heffington. Richard, you are now allowed to unmute yourself. Richard, we don't hear you.
Okay. Am I on now?
Yes, sir, you are.
Good evening. I've been a Larimer County resident since 1982. I'm not employed in the petroleum industry. It appears there is already much safety involved in the codes being presented, as well as in state law. It's inescapable that, excuse me, petroleum is an essential infrastructure to our life today. Too extreme of restrictions, which is the anti-industry goal, would simply place our future in the hands of unstable governments to supply that oil, who don't have our national interests or well-being as a concern, raise prices and make our nation vulnerable. It's just the fact that the US and state have high environmental standards. The US as a whole has the highest clean air rating among all industrialized nations. Even if we met 100% renewable tomorrow, all studies show it would have no effect upon the climate change theory models. Asian countries being the major contributors and violators of emission regulations. Please oppose too extreme of restrictions on industry in Colorado for the nation's well-being, as well as our local well-being. Some of those involved against these proposed petroleum allowances are about a complete elimination of fossil fuels and don't take any of the above mentioned comments I just made into consideration. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you, sir. Okay. David Sullivan, then Randy Evans, then Greg Heffington. Richard, you're now allowed to unmute. And we do not hear you. Let's try it again. Richard? Or I'm sorry, not Richard, but
you mean David, I think.
David?
This is David.
Gotcha now. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Hello. My name is David Sullivan. I'm a lifelong Fort Collins Loveland resident and a business owner in the automotive and the video rental store businesses. I kind of came late to this, so I only have one question, a couple comments, but one of my questions would be, you talked about the pre-production and the post-production phases, and that the risk goes down. Who is quantifying that risk, and who will inspect the pipelines other than the pad operators? Who repairs the damages in infrastructure 10 to 50, 100 years down the road in the future? Multiple homes have exploded, so I'm just waiting for new things to happen those times down the road. And how are we planning on developing around the pipelines and the pad sites the same time periods, 10 years, 50 years, 100 years down the road? Are we just gonna block those off of our grid and say, hey, that's back to the oil and pipeline gas era kind of thing? Couple comments is, if we keep basing all of our decisions in current and prior regulations, if we keep basing all of our decisions on current and prior regulations, then we're only going to get the environmental results that we have. We need new bold regulations to protect the biggest freshwater table watershed in the country. Water will be a big problem, and there is ongoing dealings with the Colorado River watershed all the way down to the Baja California. Fracking uses millions of gallons of freshwater resources. What into secure resources for only a few of our society members compared to the watershed everybody needs to survive. I was talking about the oil and gas securing their resources compared to everybody else's secure water resources, excuse me. And then and what is the long-term plan to deal with all the abandoned wells and infrastructures? And are we dealing that with the cost of them getting permits? And when are we going to deal with their cost to our society and to our environment, as we see we're getting into the hail damage and severe season for our weather?
30 seconds.
I think I will just go ahead and relieve my time. I don't want to get into anything else. I lost my train of thought. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Randy Evans, followed by Richard Shepard, and I'm sorry, not Richard Shepard, by Gary Heffington, then Lori Brunswick.
My name is.
Can we try to unmute again?
Sorry.
My name is Randy Evans, and I've been a resident of Colorado for over 40 years and of Fort Collins, Larimer County for over 30 years. The 30 years in this area, I have watched the population almost double. And the population in Weld County, which has been brought up in the past, has more than doubled. That population requires housing. That housing has ate up thousands and thousands of acres of farmland, cropland, prairie land, which reduces the nature's method of renewing the air and filtering the air. This has also been lost to the businesses that it has that have grown here to support the people that have moved to this area. That population growth has added thousands of automobiles to the roads. Is the real air quality problem that people are talking about really from the oil fields and the few areas at the wells and stuff that are actually here versus these thousands of vehicles that are on the road contributing to that pollution? I don't think people are looking at that because everybody needs their automobile for getting around. So, you know, it's just a matter that I think the Planning Commission really needs to start looking at the actual growth in this county and limiting that growth, because that growth is impacting everybody. The other thing that, you know, I've talked to the oil and gas inspectors, because I do work in that field. They will not be inspecting to the county standards. They will stay at the state standard. So that requires the county to be out doing the inspections. This is putting a double standard on this industry, a small industry overall for this area. I liken the double standards on the oil industry as to something that possibly this regular person can understand. What if the county put out a requirement that all automobiles meet a different standard that the state requires, and required both the state and county inspections on those vehicles? Where would everybody stand on that situation? You know, that these double standards for a small industry, are we going to do it to every other industry out there? I thank you for my time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Gary Heffington, Lori Brunswick, and then Tim Gosar. Gary, you're allowed to unmute.
Yeah, it's Greg. This is Greg Heffington. Everybody got me all right?
Yeah.
Okay. I native of Colorado, have been a resident of Larimer County since 1974, so 47 years. And I've seen a lot of growth. I've seen a lot of changes, and have been familiar with the oil and gas industry for many years, not as an active participant, but certainly friends, family, and acquaintances who have both benefited by it and also paid some prices for it. for the development. I clearly see the need for what the commission's trying to do here. I mean, protecting Larimer County citizens, protecting the environment, those are all extremely valuable and important initiatives. I think over time, we all recognize that fossil fuels are going to live out their life and that we've got to have alternatives to that. But there's a gap between where we are and where that will take place. And we can't force that by eliminating the opportunity to harvest the oil and gas resources that are available to us today. It was interesting to watch the setbacks, you know, the 1,000 foot versus a 2,000 foot of every existing well, and sort of how it covers up, or any existing resident or an existing building, how it covers up the opportunity for any development into the future. The real issue here is it's not about what sites available to develop, it's where is the oil that needs to be developed. I mean, that's the extraction element is there only if the body is there, if the resource is there. So it's really kind of an interesting combination of elements here. It's like, where are the resources and where can you set up a pad to harvest those resources? We need the resources to bridge this gap. And I think it's pretty short-sighted to think that somehow or another, everybody's going to be electric and wind and solar is going to be the answer to all of this when we're just not there from a technological standpoint yet. And I think you need to find this balance in this place. And I hear the arguments on both sides. I just don't think that we've got the right answer yet, because I'm not sure people are really focused on what the real challenge is this idea of how do you get from here to there, and the gap that's created or that is apparent to us because the technology still needs to be sort of developed and move forward. You know, I've been to other places and other communities where oil and gas is a huge development or piece of development, West Texas, Eastern, New Mexico, and you can drive through those areas and without question understand very completely that you're in an oil and gas development area because of the leakage and everything else. We've got some of the highest standards in the nation in Colorado, and I think that those standards are what makes it as clean as it can possibly be, and we still need to get from here to there. I think it's short-sighted to go deeper or further out than 1,000 foot setback based on what your maps show. So I'm sticking with 1,000. You bet.
Lori Brunswig, followed by Tim Gosar, and then Dottie Greeley. Lori?
Mute. Hello.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, you can hear me. Good, thank you. Thank you for giving me this chance to speak. I try to speak to the commissioners every possible time I can. And I'll tell you, my name is Lori Brunswig, and I've lived in Larimer County for 42 years. I live in Fort Collins right now. And I'm starting to wonder why. Why do I live here? Our air quality is some of the worst in the country. My daughter has asthma. She was born with it. And then she was born with it during a time when there was a lot of oil and gas in Weld County. I agree it's in Weld County. But there was a lot of really bad air and ozone, you know, coming up. Now it's even worse. So she's moving to Maine. And I'm thinking maybe I should do the same thing. So I spoke this Tuesday on the disproportionately impacted communities for the SB 19-181. And I'm wondering where that is going to fit in to what you're writing on your regulations. There should be something, because in ours, there's one just north of Fort Collins there. And in that area, there are 16 enhanced oil recovery units and a high volume disposal unit right there. Okay, so this has been fairly new. This is not something that's just popped up. I mean, I think since those people have lived there, these wells, old wells, became different. They have this high volume disposal. What about the people's water wells in those areas? That really upsets me. These people are predominantly, not predominantly, but they are in this impacted community. But what does that mean to you? That's what I want to know. So what people talk about the balance. What balance? What has ever happened to make it better? It's getting worse and worse. There's no balance. It's just we are being impacted. And that is, that's the answer. We need to transition to cleaner energy, and we've needed to. I had no choice but to use gasoline. I have no choice but to use propane or whatever the heck we have now, because that's what I have. And it is up to it's been the oil and gas industry that has been telling us what we should do for too many years. It is time to change the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Dottie Green, followed by, did Mary Badesky already speak? Leslie?
No. And we had Tim on the list, but I don't see him with a hand raised. Okay.
So hopefully he popped back on. I'm going to go ahead and allow Tim to talk now. Tim?
Good evening. My name is Tim Gosar. I'm a 25-and-a-half-year resident of Larimer County in Fort Collins. And I'd like to kind of start my comments by framing a couple of things. One is, and it's been emphasized, but it can't be emphasized enough, and that is that Larimer County has some of the worst air quality in the country. The American Lung Association gives us an F in air quality. So I want us to be considering and be mindful and be really focusing on that. And the second notion is that regulation has caused busts in the oil and gas sector. That is patently not true, right? It's an economic contraction that have caused the busts in the oil and gas sector. And I know that because my dad was an oil field geologist for over 30 years and our family suffered a couple of those busts. So I understand what that lady was talking about earlier, but they're caused by economic contraction, not by regulation. So I want to dig in on the regulations. I think it's a great start, right? But I think it's not protective enough. I would hope that we're going to move the bar forward. We're going to try to think about how we can improve the regulations beyond what the COGCC has put forth. So the first point I'd like to make is the intent, purpose, and applicability. And that is Andrew Forkas Goodmanson from Logic has sent you all a nice suggested language for that section. He's got 1 intent, 2 purpose, and 3 applicability. And I believe it really summarizes exactly what the regulations should start with, because that is absolutely imperative that we get that right. And I would say that when we talk about that section and we talk about how important that is, that in classrooms all over the world, they're emphasizing and re-emphasizing concepts that they want their students to learn and use moving forward. So it can't be stated enough when you want to emphasize something to put it in the regulations over and over again when it applies, when it should be there, because that's how we learn, that's how we focus, that's how we make sure things are done right. When we talk about setbacks and reciprocal setbacks, we should name that in the regulations. I think it's important to do that. And I don't know why we're differentiating whether industry is there in the land first or whether it's home ownership. I think that's crazy, right? If oil and gas gets there first, there's less of a setback, less protection. If development gets there first, we have more protections there. That's crazy. They should be similar. When we talk about zoning, I think oil and gas should be put into heavy industrial zones only. I think that's important. I think that's something we should emphasize. When we talk about alternative location analysis, we should be not talking about putting anything in 100-year floodplains. I think that's crazy. I think when we talk about the alternative location analysis and saying that you get 1 + 3 alternate sites, it has this implied notion that one of these sites is going to be picked. One of these places is going to be chosen. And clearly Senate Bill 181 gives local and state authorities a chance to say no, right? So I like to add some language in there that says, even though you're giving alternative site analysis and multiple sites, does not give you any better chance of getting an application or not. Then I'd like to sort of wrap up a little bit with
Tim,
yeah.
Your time was up 10 seconds.
Oh, was it? Excuse me. I'm sorry. Thank you for giving me that extra time. I really appreciate it. And thanks for the opportunity to speak to you.
But please make sure you get your comments to us.
Okay, I will. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Hold on. Dottie Greeley, followed by Mary Badetsky. Dottie, you're free to unmute. Dottie, you're still muted.
Am I okay now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. My name is Dottie Greeley. I've been a resident with my family 23 years in Larimer County. And I'm fascinated with how people are really engaging and really concerned about this whole issue. And this issue is very deep and it's very wide, and it's not going to be easily solved, I don't think. But the oil and gas industry is thriving. It's a major contributor to our economy. I think that's wonderful. I think we need to be cautious when we put too much credence in wind and solar. They're new and upcoming industries, and they're not perfected yet. And we have huge implications for pollution because of the fiberglass construction. And so we may be trading one problem for another by trying to eliminate something that we already are well informed about. And that industry, the oil and gas industry, is highly regulated. So I appreciate this. I'm glad that everyone's engaged. And shout out to everyone for taking part in this. That's all.
Thank you, Dottie. Mary Badesky, you can now unmute. Mary?
Sorry.
There you go.
Hi, this is Mary Badowski, resident of Larimer County. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to share this evening, and I appreciate all the work that's gone into the draft regulation items that have been addressed so far. I definitely appreciate the inclusion of reverse setbacks. I think that's definitely something that I would like to see the county include with the regulations. So I'm thankful for that, but I don't feel that distances are adequate for protecting public health and safety where they're written right now. It just doesn't seem logical to be able to build a home 1,000 feet from a well site that has not finished or even started the most impactful stages of oil and gas development. Scientific studies support a safe setback distance and reverse setback distance of 2,500 feet. I agree economics are important, but health and safety cannot be compromised, especially to support an industry that is already heavily subsidized by taxpayers. I do agree with others that 50 feet from a plugged and abandoned well is not enough. The Davis 43-6 well in Broomfield is an example of a plugged and abandoned well that's causing ongoing problems, leaking methane hundreds of feet beyond the location of the well. I'd ask the county to protect future citizens as well as current with stronger setbacks and reverse setbacks than we are seeing here in these drafts. I think it's also important to include a safe setback distance for irrigation ditches. I know these supply a private property owner with their own water. However, they often connect with major water resources in the community. and the risk for contamination shouldn't be ignored. Also, I have concerns about the zoning, allowing oil and gas in multiple zoning districts. It is a heavy industrial activity and should be allowed in heavy industrial zones only. Trying to put it into other zones also makes for incongruent development. It affects the landscape and views that the county has worked hard to preserve with their open spaces, and also increases nuisance impacts to surrounding residents and wildlife. Nothing else for this evening, but I thank you. And I know I've submitted written comments already that you guys have seen. So thank you so much.
Thank you. That is all the people that have asked to speak thus far. Is there anybody else? If so, please raise your hand. Otherwise, I'm going to give that just a second. Andy. Andy Goecki, you are now allowed to talk.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right, so thank you for the opportunity to just leave some comments here. I'm a resident of Fort Collins. I'd just like to echo some of the thoughts shared earlier. I do really think the idea of having different setback requirements depending on who's there first really don't make any sense. I mean, there is scientific evidence of safe or not, and they should be matching. I agree completely that right now, oil and gas are very, very important to our livelihood, our economy, really everything that we do. But they're also, the costs that we pay for that are not represented in the cost of the product. So that's something that's very important to acknowledge as well. There's subsidies. We've invested a lot in really just extracting very efficiently. That makes it seem artificially cheaper as opposed to a lot of other things. Another important factor as well is when we're talking about oil and gas drilling is that what was raised earlier in terms of something like transportation, granted that is a contributor, but when you look at the relative percentages, that's really about, let's say about 1/7, about 15% of your overall contribution to emissions through carbon emissions. But when you're talking about drilling oil and gas extraction, it's really a double problem we're talking about, because you're bearing the costs of both the extraction of that from the ground while also acknowledging that we're then going to consume that directly here. So not only do you have the impact of the heavy industry bringing it from the ground, the pollution that's involved with that, but then you also get the consequences that we have, which granted right now we depend on them, we rely on them, but it does basically double the amount of damage. So when people are pointing out rightly the poor air quality that we already have, it's really only going to get worse if we only keep encouraging further extraction beyond what we already have. And I'll leave it at that. Once again, really appreciate the opportunity to share my thoughts.
Thank you, Andy. All right. Nancy York, you're now allowed to speak.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Excellent. Well, first off, I want to say that I believe that we should err on the side of science, and that includes health studies and what have you. Oh, by the way, I'm from Fort Collins, and it's been my home for over 80 years. So the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change expert scientists warn there are only 12 years of global warming to be kept to a maximum of 1.5 degrees centigrade. And they said this in 2018, so we have only 8 more years. And if we do not reach that point, then we significantly worsen risks of drought, floods, extreme heat, and poverty of millions, hundreds of millions of people. And that brings with it food scarcity, effects on plants and insects that's going to put us behind. And there was also the point of climate refugees. The call is that we move away from fossil fuels and move to renewable energy. And you know, as far as jobs are concerned, they have a just transition, which so people will learn new jobs, other jobs, or the oil workers will be put to the task of plugging up the orphaned holes. What we need is a political will and to set an example, a strong example with strong regulations. And 2,500 feet is a scientifically mentioned setback, period. And so I hope that that's where we should err, on the side of science. When you web search the top causes of death in the United States, they're heart disease, cancer, and lastly, COVID-19, which is something strange. You'd think that was first, but toxic air pollution is a contributor to all three, according to studies. So once again, I think I want you to err on the side of science. Thank you very much. And you all have a good evening.
Thank you.
What remains of it.
You as well. Okay, Steve Shagri. You're allowed to unmute, sir.
Yes, I'd like to thank the commissioners for allowing us this forum to speak this evening. I just want to cover one topic in regards to setbacks. I would like to refer everyone here to the 2018 report published by the Colorado Department of Public Health and Safety by Chief Medical Officer Dr. Larry Walk, that unequivocally states that a 500-foot setback is more than sufficient, and he did not recommend any public action be taken at this time. Now, in the 2 years since that report was published, drilling practices and hydraulic fracturing practices have only gotten safer. They have not gotten worse. And once more, I would like to refer that article to the commissioners and everyone in attendance. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Alan Phillip, you're now allowed to speak. Or maybe you didn't ask to speak, I'm sorry. I'm seeing nobody else wanting to speak. At this time, it looks like everybody that wanted to speak has spoken. Is there anybody else that wants to raise their hand that hasn't spoken so far? I don't see any hands raised. We've been at it now for a little over 2 hours. I really want to express our appreciation for everybody participating tonight and keeping all of our comments civil and organized. We appreciate your comments, and we're certainly going to consider them as we continue through this process. You can look forward to us posting some additional changes to the regulations based upon the next set of subjects that are going to come up on the webpage. So please pay attention to our webpage and keep up with those topics. Leslie or Commissioner Shattuck McNally, do you have anything that you want to add before we leave?
Thank you, Matt Lafferty and Matt Sura, Frank, Leslie, Leah, and Lori Kettridge, all for being here tonight. The staff, I know, put a lot of work into organizing this, and I appreciate them being here this evening. And I want to thank to all the attendees for being here and asking great questions been taking notes and typing them on my computer over here, and just really appreciate the feedback and everyone participating and being respectful and civil and having a great conversation. And just appreciate this opportunity to have public comment and interaction. Look forward to having conversations as the Board of County Commissioners on these. And always, you can go to the website, email me, contact me. I'd be always open to answering people's calls if they want to have a further conversation. So thank you all for being here tonight. I really hope that the commissioners will get a little more time to look at these ourselves and digest them and ask questions to you all. And I appreciate, again, letting me have a comment tonight and to participate. So thanks.
Again, thanks. We will make every effort to get information posted within a timely manner here. We'll post this video and any other additional information we had for you tonight. And Leslie, Matt, anything else?
Yes, really quickly, I'll echo the thanks to thank you everybody who stayed on. We had up to, at one point, up over 50 people on, and we still have about 40 people on. So thanks for sticking with us through the night. We will take all your written comments and compile them into a set of comments to forward on to the commissioners and the Planning Commission as part of this segment of the drafts. And then we'll do the same as we move into the next stage of drafting. And we'll continue to go through those and look at necessary changes and then have further conversations about what changes may come out of these drafts. So thank you again for participating. I'll also mention for those of you who are interested, on Tuesday afternoon at 3:30 on April 13th, there is a public meeting to go before the commissioners and express whether you are interested in seeing the temporary moratorium on oil and gas applications, have it expire on the 15th or be extended and or amended beyond that date. So that is another related matter to this for those of you who are interested in following along. So thanks again for being here, and really appreciate all the comments.
Thank you. Have a good evening.